Drinking life from a fire hose, it seems sometimes. Sound familiar? This is life in the A.S.A.P lane. If you're feeling anxious, stressed, addicted, pressured, you are not alone. In fact, there's a global epidemic of stress and anxiety. Many aren't able to cope without the use of pills, alcohol, food, even retail therapy, shopping. The result is record levels of opioid overdose deaths, obesity levels, and teen suicide attempts. The good news is, there is an exit ramp, and your host, best-selling author, and former U.S. Congressman Alan Steelman will guide you to your very own exit. Alan's mission is to help you learn about and adopt strategies and techniques to restore balance and equilibrium to your life. You'll learn from Alan and his guests simple and practical stress-relieving techniques, and you will be inspired by numerous interviews with other people just like you, who have moved from stressed out to charged up, and from misery to mastery. You are cordially invited to join us and learn to live your life in joy and on purpose. Take a deep breath. Let's begin exiting the A.S.A.P lane with Alan.
Welcome, everyone, to Exiting the A.S.A.P lane. This is an episode that will resonate with every single one of our listeners, because it certainly does with me, because we've all experienced some level of stress and anxiety leading into some high-stakes event in our lives. Athletes, business executives, public speakers, high-profile TV news anchors, and all of us have experienced this at one time or another. The message, for those of you who've listened in the past, and the mission of this program, we are living our lives in the midst of a global epidemic of stress and anxiety. Each episode in this podcast series is designed to provide a guest or guests who can provide practical guidance to each of us on how to exit the anxious and stressed life that exists for so many of us in this, the digital age, and restore balance and equilibrium to our lives. My two guests today are returning after a previous appearance on the inaugural episode titled The Magic in the Brain. They are Dr. Dianna Purvis-Jaffin and Dr. Jennifer Howland of the esteemed Brain Performance Institute at the University of Texas at Dallas. Dr. Purvis-Jaffin is Director of Programs and Strategy at the Institute, and Dr. Howland is Director of Stress Solutions. They are doing groundbreaking work at the Institute in a number of areas, and we will explore that again in today's program. Performance anxiety. This is very common. It can become debilitating when it is intense enough to create a panic attack. Dawn Scott, who is the Edward R. Murrah and Emmy Award-winning CBS lead news anchor in Little Rock, Arkansas, was profiled in my newly released book, Yoga on the Yellow Brick Road, Exiting the A.S.A.P lane, Calm Your Mind, talked about feeling oncoming panic attacks just before going on the air early in her career, and finally discovering that a practice of yoga and meditation helped her finally conquer this. Dan Harris, the ABC newsman, has had a similar experience on the air, an oncoming panic attack, and has actually created a website and an app providing a number of practical meditation and breathing techniques. There is good news amidst all this. There are tools and methods available to help all of us deal with this common problem, and Dianna and Jenny are going to share some of that with us and help us understand the problem better. So, welcome to both of you.
Thank you.
So, Dianna, would you, any athlete or follower of sports is certainly familiar with the term choking. We're all familiar with what's called stage fright. Would you please define those? Those are more street terms for this more clinical term that you all use here at the Institute. Would you please define what stress-related performance failure is?
Alan, that's a really good question. At its most basic level, a performance failure is you're failing to perform. And it's interesting, the causes of it, although the same in all of our brains, are hardwired responses and stress responses, a performance failure may look very different for each of us. A news anchor on air having a panic attack with 5 million viewers is going to suffer extreme embarrassment and maybe a ding on their career. A law enforcement officer, we do a lot of work locally with the Dallas Police Department, A performance failure in military or law enforcement or first responder could actually mean life or death. If you're a public speaker and you start to get anxious about the talk you're going to give and you can't catch your breath, you're going to have a hard time conveying your information to your audience. So the bottom line about a performance failure is that it's going to look different for all of us. We have them at home, we have them at work. We may exhaust all of our resources during a given day and go home and not be able to be patient with our children and parent well, or with our spouses. At work, we may miss deadlines, be anger or stress filled in meetings and not communicate well. So it's a wide spectrum.
Uh, Jenny, we all work hard to develop a skill set for whatever career path we've chosen, and we practice those skills, and we never even think about how our skill set could get neutralized by a panic attack or a debilitating level of anxiety. So could you talk a little bit about that particular issue?
Well, I think it comes right back to what Dianna said about performance failures. And it doesn't matter if we have the skill set, if we let our emotions essentially hijack us, if we have that performance failure, if we're not managing our emotions and having our brain, essentially our frontal lobes, our executive functioning, planning, thinking, reasoning, if that guy's not online and we get kind of hijacked by panic, stress, fear, any of those negative emotions, then it does impact our skill set. We're essentially reacting to the situation instead of responding with our brains the way that our skill set would come into play.
Elaborate just a bit on the hijacking. I know we've talked about the brain before and the prefrontal cortex and the amygdala, but talk a little bit about that so they'll understand what you mean by hijacking.
So we have a system in our brain, this primitive system that's responsible for our fight or flight response, and part of that is the limbic system. In that is the amygdala. And the amygdala turns on when we need to either run from that tiger or fight that tiger back in the day. But now our amygdala can turn on and send all of these hormones and neurochemicals throughout our body to fight or flee, even if it's a perceived stress. So it might be your mother-in-law on the phone, or you're sitting in traffic, and we don't necessarily need that to come on. But when that guy comes on, your frontal lobes, like we just talked about, planning, reasoning, thinking, judgment, emotional management, it can turn off. So you're essentially either responding with your frontal lobes or you're reacting with your amygdala, and we have less control over our reactions when the amygdala comes online.
So as long as our prefrontal cortex is rationally processing whatever event we're preparing for, then we should be able to deal with that event without a stress-related performance failure. But it's just when you can't manage that activity and your amygdala takes over.
When you don't manage your physiology, just the way your body is working, then that can actually happen. And Dianna has a really great way of explaining it when she talks about the fast track and the slow track.
Yeah, please elaborate, Dianna.
I will. So when we get emotional, whether we're angry, frustrated, upset, anxious, we generate typically a stress response, like Jenny mentioned, our fight or flight. So when we have all of this sensory information coming into our brain: sight, smell, taste, memory. So if perhaps in the past I had been bit by a dog and I see a dog, that emotion inspired by seeing that dog reacts so quickly, we call that our fast track. It essentially goes through a relay center called the thalamus straight to the amygdala, and we can mount a stress response before we even have time to really think about it. Oh no, that's a friendly dog, but we have already instituted that stress response. We call that the fast track, and our emotions drive this. As opposed to the slower track, I think, oh, it's a furry dog, it's a sweet dog, it's not going to bite me, it's not going to eat my cat or hurt me in any way. But that takes a lot longer to rationalize because all of those thoughts go through multiple circuits and they take longer to get back down to the amygdala to say, calm down, it's not a true threat. So if we're threatened, whether, like Jenny said, it's in traffic or a real life or death threat, we're going to mount the same stress response. And thinking your way out of that can be very helpful, but it can also be very difficult, and it takes a little more time, so we call that the slow track. So we like to teach people a method. A number of people in this chronically stressed world that you said that we are now in the midst of this global epidemic of stress and anxiety, we're finding that a number are creating a baseline of feeling depressed, anxious, worried, and this can become sort of a baseline pattern for a number of individuals. And like Jenny said, our amygdala's job is to keep us safe. So part of the way it does that is by looking for patterns, what's normal for us. So if our new baseline has become to be anxious and worried all the time, and we wake up every morning feeling anxiety and a sense of dread, even though that's a maladaptive pattern, it's what our amygdala thinks is going to keep us safe because it's our new normal. So here at the Brain Performance Institute, we've recently launched heart rate variability training, where we teach individuals to focus on the energy of the heart, because that energy goes very quickly up through and is routed to the amygdala and can kind of reset that baseline to a new baseline if you practice these methods over time to help you become less anxious, depressed, fearful, worried, so that you can perform better in a number of situations throughout your life.
Okay, so we're all familiar, of course, with a little anxiety as we're getting ready for making a talk or whatever. But what has to happen for that common anxiety feeling that we all have when we're preparing for what we perceive to be a high stakes event in our life, and something bigger than that, which becomes a panic attack or a debilitating condition of some kind?
Well, again, a few things can contribute to that. First of all, we like to think about how resilient you are as a battery. So if your battery is fully charged, you're going to be able to withstand your normal stressors throughout the day a lot better. Think about a challenging situation you may routinely encounter and how you handle that if you're well rested, well fed, all is going well, and think of your internal batteries being well charged, you're typically going to respond to that with a lot less angst. You may not, oh, whatever, it's not a big deal. Contrast that to a day when you're not well rested, things are going rough, maybe you've not gotten to eat lunch or fuel your body, um, or take some time away, and you're just chronically overstressed, then your capacity, your battery, how much battery you have to deal with those stressors becomes lower and lower. So if you're not taking care of yourself, if you're using drugs, drinking, not eating well, not getting any physical activity, enough rest, you will lower your capacity to deal with stress. So common stressors can become major stressors. When you're chronically stressed, the release of those stress hormones can actually impair parts of the brain that help you perform optimally. So it's about keeping your inner battery charged through your lifestyle habits, and as Jenny mentioned, learning ways to effectively manage your stress physiology.
I think it's an important point you just made, which is that any high performing individual will have focused on developing the skills to perform. And if they've learned about how to manage their stress, they still may not have thought about the broader definition of having their battery properly charged and how sleep and nutrition play into that. So I think that's a very important point. Could you just quickly elaborate on what's commonly known as the 6 pillars of well-being, so our listeners will understand what it means to be a totally fit person in terms of both mind, body, and spirit?
I will, and I'll couch it in the umbrella of resilience and some of the resilience and performance solutions that we develop here at the Brain Performance Institute. So if you think about your batteries having several components that charge it, one is going to be how you sleep. Sleep is so important. The body repairs, the brain rejuvenates, memories consolidate. Sleep is so important to your well-being. Likewise, fitness. Fitness makes us more resilient individuals. Being physically fit has so many profound benefits on your brain structures, your brain function, and your brain chemicals that help us buffer and manage stress. Social relationships that are good and strong also help provide resilience to us, as does how well you eat, and how you use your brain and how you manage your physiology. So all of these pillars combine together to, when you're attending to them with appropriate self-care, taking care of your human being system, you're going to have a more charged battery. When you get highly stressed, you could, like Jenny and I give a lot of talks, and we're always very well prepared, but if I can't manage my stress in front of an audience, I can't remember, because when you get a very strong stress reaction, it sort of shuts down the frontal part of your brain. The amygdala has more connectivity to the front of your brain to help keep you safe than the front of your brain, which is the thinking, knowing part, has back to the amygdala. So there are techniques we can teach to strengthen the connection for the thinking brain to be able to calm the amygdala down, plus also emotional and breathing techniques we teach to calm the amygdala down so you can access what you know for your performance. And it could be knowledge you're giving a talk, or it could be motor memory if you're an athlete getting to perform in an event.
And Jenny, one thing that's often overlooked, and it's a major characteristic of life in the digital age, and that's the social network point that Dianna just talked about, and the loneliness that comes from spending all your time on your digital devices and withdrawing more and more from the social networks that used to define all of our lives. Could you talk just a little bit about the importance of the social network and loneliness and how that plays into being a fully, well balanced person?
Yeah, absolutely. Those good social relationships that Diana was talking about, not just the relationships, but they need to be good and strong. They absolutely bolster our resilience. And when we spend so much time with our phones and our screens and our computers and our laptop, and we're not taking the time to have conversations with one another to actually create those connections, then you're right, it can lead to loneliness. It can lead to us feeling like we don't have the support that we need. It's a huge thing.
So let's talk about some practical steps now that one can apply to their life when they're moving into an important meeting or any other kind of high stakes situation in their life. So, Dinah, could you elaborate a bit on some of the practical ways, breathing or meditation or whatever they may be?
Well, yes, Alan, I'd be glad to. Um, Breathing typically underscores most of the practices we teach. And the reason being is that when you breathe slowly and deeply, you activate the part of the nervous system that is calming. They can help to start unwinding that stress response and calm you down and slow your heart rate. So we find the very first method we teach is we call, keeping in control of your breath, getting your breath. So if you find yourself, your heart starting to beat faster and you're breathing more quickly, the very first step we teach is something called heart-focused breathing, where you focus in the area of your heart as if your breath is coming from that area in your chest or your heart area, and breathe slowly and deeply, a little more slowly and deeply than you normally would. And we find that typically a rhythm of about five, a count of five in, breathe in, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and breathe out to a count of five is slowing and calming. Everybody has a different rate at which they're going to find calms them. Mine's a little slower, someone else's might be a little faster. But the very first step is heart focused breathing. It calms your nervous system and helps you get control of your breath and calming down that stress response. We also teach some other methods around this training that add the feeling, because remember we said earlier that emotions are the drivers of your physiology. So fearful, angry, anxious, frustrated kinds of emotions activate us very quickly into a stress response, and we can counteract that and build a more calm baseline state by adding feelings of gratitude, love, compassion, kindness. That any kind of feeling that feels like that to your breath can then produce a heart signal that we call a coherent signal that calms your amygdala and your stress response.
I think
Yeah.
it's important to add that the heart actually sends more signals to the brain than the brain sends to the heart. And most people really don't realize that. But that's one of the reasons why, as Diana mentioned earlier, that fast track method is so much more effective than the slow track. by managing those emotions.
Yes, if you tend to be an anxious, depressed, worried person or a very reactive person, and it doesn't take much to get you spun up, say in a meeting at work or in traffic.
So, Jenny, you talk a lot here in all the programming at the Institute about the need to be present or the need to be mindful in all the things that you do. So, is that kind of what we're talking about here in terms of the way to prepare for moving into a potentially high stress situation?
So, being present is very important, and we do talk a lot about that with mindfulness. But I kind of want to reframe that word in the context that we're talking about right now in terms of performance, and I want to call it awareness. And I want to talk a little bit and say that it's calm awareness. So, it's not just being in this state of alertness, but it's about being calm and aware. And then, Dianna, what do you do once you are in that state?
Well, if you find that you're going to be in a potentially reactive or a not productive state, you then have to make a choice. Sometimes it feels really good to be angry if someone's wronged us, and we're justified to be angry. But if we choose to indulge in that, we're only draining our own inner battery. We're not hurting anybody else. So it's awareness coupled with a choice to do something different about it and manage your emotions. And after that is when you can use techniques that we've taught that are whether they're mindfulness or the heart rate variability training and the breathing and the feeling, and you can use these to shift your physiology very quickly so that you can perform better.
And then over time, as you do that, that becomes your new baseline. So you've shifted your physiology, you've trained your brain to go to that state more of calmness, awareness, the choice, as opposed to the frenzied state that you may be in previously.
And we call this an intelligent energy management system, Ellen, and that's part of what we teach here at the Brain Performance Institute.
Well, you've mentioned heart rate variability a couple of times. One thing that I think is very exciting is having some technology now that can be added to knowing what causes it in your life and knowing how to measure it. So, could you talk a little bit about the heart rate variability monitor, the technology side of this?
Well, there's several different ways to measure heart rate variability. There's lots of different monitors and devices out there. The one that we actually like the best is put out by the HeartMath Institute, and it is essentially an advanced heart rate monitor that you can hook up to your ear or to your finger if you have specific software, and you can download an app on your phone called Inner Balance. You can actually watch yourself train those heart rhythms Dianna was talking about into coherence, and then you can see in real time as you're using these techniques and these breathing techniques and these emotion regulation techniques, you can see in real time how your physiology is changing.
Okay, very good. So, you all here at the Institute, then, if I could summarize my understanding, is you are both doing research on this problem, which afflicts all of us at various times in our lives. You are documenting the causes, and you are providing practical techniques added to this new technology that one can use to measure this in their own life. Is that a decent summary of?
Well, it's a summary that we have the Center for Brain Health and the Brain Performance Institute. The Center for Brain Health does neuroscience research, and here at the Brain Performance Institute, we translate that research and other larger bodies of research into practical programs that improve brain performance in all individuals.
Okay, very good. So let's close by saying to our listeners that while there have been a number of big words like amygdala and neuroscience and prefrontal cortex and all this, it is something that we all have had to deal with in our lives. I think the good news is that there are practical techniques and there is important work being done in this area that will help us in all phases of life, all the way from athletics to a salesman or a speaker or a minister or anyone who has to make public appearances. So, in closing, I want to thank Jenny and Dianna again for being guests on exiting the A.S.A.P lane, and special thanks for all the important groundbreaking work that you all are doing here.
Thank you, Alan.
Thank you, Alan.
It truly is a major contribution to something that we all have to deal with. And for our listeners, please go to the website at brainhealth.utdallas.edu. That is brainhealth.utdallas.edu, and you can see the wide range of seminars that are open to the public, and I encourage all of you to come because you will benefit greatly in your own life. Thank you very much for listening, and we will see you next week.